Hello, class. So today we begin with Machiavelli, Il Principe, the Prince. This is the first text we're going to read, and it is in a way paradigmatic of modern political thought. So we'll discuss the argument in the text, but let me begin by saying a few words about the author himself, Machiavelli, and the context in which he's writing. So Machiavelli is a Florentine, that is, he's born in Florence in 1469, and this is the period of the Renaissance. Renaissance is a period where Europe is witnessing a kind of rebirth after the great achievements of the classical period in Greek antiquity and then the Roman Empire. There is a pretty serious collapse, the entry into what are called the Dark Ages and the Middle Ages, where the kind of cultural heights, philosophical heights, and civilizational heights that Europe had seen during the classical period are shattered away. They're no longer there. So the Renaissance is a period of rebirth in the sense that many thinkers, artists, etc., are going back to the classical periods and then trying to draw inspiration from them and rejuvenate the cultural, social, political, and economic life of Europe. So Machiavelli, in some sense, is one of the best illustrations of the Renaissance spirit. He's going back to read classical political thinkers and history, and then creating from them a new vision of politics that is relevant to the period that is emerging, namely modernity. So he appears on the stage of history in the turn of the 16th century. His context is decisively shaped by the French invasion of Florence in 1494. Florence at this time is a small city-state that is ruled by the Medicis. Medicis are one of the major banking families who obviously own a lot of wealth and have a system of patronage. They basically rule the whole city through their alliances and networks. And the French invasion does two major things. One is that it removes the Medicis from power, and for a brief period, it restores the Florentine Republic. Florence, before the takeover by the Medicis, was a republic city-state. Now, Machiavelli acquires political influence in this new republic, or this renewed republic. He becomes a chancellor for a brief period, but then mostly serves as a secretary. And as a secretary, he goes on numerous diplomatic missions. He visits the French king, the Roman emperor, the Pope. What you should note is that these are all characters that are in this book. He writes about all of the people he meets, that he dialogues with, that he gets to know, that he gets to understand from a perspective of politics, like how do they do politics. Now, within a few years, the Republic actually collapses. This time, there is another war. It's the Spaniards who invade Florence. And what the Spanish invasion does is that it not only collapses the Florentine Republic, but it actually restores the rule of the Medicis, right? So the Medicis come back to power. This time, the ruler, the new prince, is Lorenzo de' Medici. And Machiavelli is actually, in this period, tried, he's imprisoned and tortured, and then he goes into retirement. Now, it is in this period of retirement where he writes his major political texts. He writes a book called The Art of War. He writes a few histories of Florence. And then he produces Il Principe, which is probably his most famous book. This is the first book he wrote. And then he spent most of his time actually writing the Discorsi, or the Discourses on Livy, which we will read tomorrow. So there are two crucial things about this, his personal experience and the context that are actually very relevant. First, you should note that he's somebody who gets to play the game of politics. He's a secretary, he gets to know many people, he learns from them, and he understands how politics happens in reality, right? So he knows how to play the game. He's an insider. He's a political insider. At the same time, you should also note that he came to prominence, he became a political activist of sorts, only in the Florentine Republic. So he has a sympathy, and this will become very clear, I think, when we read the discourses, He's actually a Republican at heart. Okay, now we'll discuss what it means to be a Republican. But this is obviously not in the contemporary sense of the term Republican in American politics. It's actually a different and much more serious political historical tradition. But it begins in some sense in the period of modernity with Machiavelli. So Machiavelli is both an insider to politics, so he knows how to play the game. He likes being political. He likes having power and influence. But at the same time, his political sympathies lie with the Republican form of government, not with the form of principalities or monarchies, where one ruler rules the city-state. So this is the context. And now we can discuss, say a few things about the book itself. So the book itself was written, he completed the book in 1513, but it was only published in later, posthumously, in 1532. And it becomes really, really big. It's probably his famous work, even though I would hold that the Discourse is actually a better and much more sophisticated text. This, for some reason, becomes much more popular. And again, the important thing is to realize that Machiavelli is trying to both, he misses, when he's in retirement, he misses the active political life that he led in the Republic. So in some sense, he's trying to both acquire influence in the new kingdom of the Medicis, but also he has a more intellectual ambition at heart. He wants to actually rethink politics. It might be instructive at this point to read a few passages from the dedication that he writes. Now, this is a dedication that he's writing to Lorenzo de' Medici. Lorenzo de' Medici is the new prince of the Florentine kingdom. And Machiavelli is trying to tell him how to rule. Machiavelli is trying to instruct him. This is, in some sense, this book is a manual for how to rule. And it is intended to the new prince, somebody who becomes a prince, not because of the family they belong to, but simply because they're able to acquire power and establish a kingdom, right? So he says in the dedication, I'm anxious to offer myself to your magnificence with some token of my devotion to you, and I have not found among my belongings anything as dear to me or that I value as much as my understanding of the deeds of great men, won by me from a long acquaintance with the contemporary affairs and a continuous study of the ancient world. So he's saying that the only big gift that he has to offer to the new prince is his knowledge of politics that he has acquired through long experience, but also continuous study of history, right? So this is the intellectual work he's doing, which is really quite remarkable. He, throughout this period of his retirement, he's reading history, but in reading history, he's trying to give you a completely new interpretation of politics. As he says in the discourses, in the preface, which we will read again tomorrow, he says, I have resolved to enter upon a path still untrodden, right? So he has a very, he's conscious of the fact that he's doing something new. Now, what exactly is he doing that is new? He's reading and learning from antiquity, but in order to unpack the motives of political action, right? As I said in my introductory lecture, in the classical period, thinking about politics was about how to achieve a good life, how to develop political institutions so that people have a fulfilling and enriched life, how it allows people in a particular state to be good. That's not Machiavelli's interest. Machiavelli is going back to history, and he's looking at the mechanisms of action. He's trying to extract from the past the ways in which people actually act, which means he's looking at things like real things. How do people conspire? How do they murder? How do they revolt in the service of politics? How do they pursue their political interests? And he's asking the question, well, what do these darker things that we kind of leave out of political philosophy, what do these tell us about how political life actually is lived? Right? So this is the kind of intellectual brilliance that he's aspiring to do. And I think by the end of the text, you'll realize that he's able to achieve this. So in writing this dedication, he's in some sense trying to do these two things. One is he's trying to obviously flatter the new king. He's saying that, hey, look, I'm a really experienced guy. I really understand how politics works, and I can give you a lot of advice. So partly his ambition is, make me a minister or something, make me a consultant to you. But also, at the same time, as he's writing also the discourses during this period, he's really trying to give a more concrete theoretical and philosophical account of politics. So let's see what his argument is. The text begins, the first chapters, he says that, this is chapter 1, he says, all the states, all the dominions under whose authority men have lived in the past and live now have been and are either republics or principalities. This is an important distinction. This book is about principalities. He goes on in the next chapters to talk about different kinds of principalities. One is hereditary principalities, that is old principalities, principalities that are based on belonging to a royal family that claims to have divine right to rule over other people. Or it can be a new principality where one person establishes and founds a new city-state. It is not a republic. We will discuss this issue about the republic tomorrow when we read the discourses. So today we'll focus only on principalities because this book is about the principalities. After all, the title is The Prince. Now, what is a principality? Principality is simply a state that is ruled by one person. A one person who either belongs to a royal family or person who founds a new state. You'll realize that in the first few chapters, Machiavelli's key interest is to advise a new ruler, a new prince, somebody who founds a new state. So his central concern in this book is to ask the question, well, if you acquire power, if you found a new state, how do you govern and maintain your state? That's the key question, right? So Lorenzo de' Medici, you've come to power now. Let me tell you how you must govern so that you can maintain your power. Okay. Now, in order to answer this question, Machiavelli will introduce three major concepts, three concepts that are key to understanding his conception of politics. One is glory, the second is fortuna, and the third is virtue. Fortuna means fortune, and virtue is virtue. So let's begin with the first. What is glory? The key question is, well, if you're a prince, why would you want to rule in the first place? What exactly are you trying to achieve? And Machiavelli claims that for a principality, again, a state which is ruled by one person, the sole objective is glory. That is the underlying value of that kind of political regime. The prince is required to give himself to a cause. He's somebody who's an individual who's able to transcend his private interests and rule people in order to give both glory to himself and his people. And what does it mean to acquire glory? It means that you acquire a certain kind of immortality, that you are remembered by history. You become part of the historical memory of humanity. So to acquire immortality, the key goal is to achieve a certain kind of fame, a historical fame. That is, you transcend your temporal limitation, your finitudeness of your life, and you become somebody who's able to be remembered in the future, right? That's, after all, what it means to be glory. This is something that has plagued all of classical life in Greek antiquity, for example. If you've ever read Homer's works, the Odysseus and Iliad, a lot of the warriors who were fighting the Trojan War wanted to acquire glory. They wanted to be remembered for their participation in that war and for the great deeds that they achieved in that war. So this is the spirit in which he's talking about politics, is that if one person wants to rule, if they want to become a new prince, their sole motivation is to acquire a certain kind of glory, right? To be able to no longer be limited, to not be forgotten by history, to be remembered by history. After all, we remember these great politicians and kings and monarchs, right, of the past. That is because they have acquired glory. So this text shows us that principality as a political regime also has an underlying value, an underlying set of motivations that legitimate itself in its rule, right? So a principality only makes sense as long as the prince is able to acquire glory. That is the sole ambition of the principality as a political form. This brings us to the second concept, fortuna, or fortune. Now, fortune might appear to be, in first impression, a certain kind of mythic concept, right? Because it evokes the notion of destiny. Well, what is your fortune? It's something that is determined by God. That's not quite what Machiavelli has in mind. So let's read from chapter 25, the very first passage. He gives us an account of what fortune actually means in this kind of mythic or theological sense. He says, I'm not unaware that many have held and hold the opinion that events are controlled by fortune and by God in such a way that the prudence of men cannot modify them, indeed that men have no influence whatsoever. Because of this, they would conclude that there is no point in sweating over things, but that one should submit to the rulings of chance. Right? So this would be a very theological conception of fortune or destiny, namely that you simply cannot control the outcomes of life. Everything is already written, and you are simply somebody who's going to get get whatever outcome that has been decided for you by God. Machiavelli wants to contest this. Machiavelli says, sometimes when thinking of this, I have myself inclined to the same opinion. Nonetheless, this is a classic Machiavellian move. Nonetheless, he finds room for exception. He says, so as to not rule out free will, that is human free will, the human capacity to influence and alter our outcomes, I believe that it is probably true that fortune is the arbiter of half the things we do, leaving the other half or so to be controlled by ourselves. Now, this is an important passage. He says, fortune is the arbiter of half the things we do. Notice that he's both attacking a kind of theological view of destiny and fate. He's saying not everything can be determined and left to God or God's narrative or writing of fate or destiny, that humans can exercise their own agency. Humans can determine the outcomes. But nonetheless, fortune has a role to play. It has 50% of the role to play in determining outcomes. Which means what? It means that he's both skeptical of this kind of mythic concept of fortune, but he's also skeptical of a certain kind of science of politics. A science of politics that would claim to be able to predict things, that claims that everything can be understood and explained. He's saying, no, in politics is about statecraft. It's about knowing how to maintain your state. It requires luck. It requires a good fortune, buona fortuna. It means that you have to sometimes be dependent on context. In this chapter 25, he discusses two kinds of people. People who are circumspect, that is, they are always cautious about what to do, and sometimes people, and discusses a second type of person, impetuous, person who act without much care, right? And he says, whether or not they succeed depends exactly on fortune, on the conditions and the context in which they are acting. Sometimes a person who's really circumspect might be very successful because they have been dealt a good hand by fortune, but sometimes they might fail. Sometimes, similarly, for example, he discusses the person, Pope Julius II, and he says Pope Julius was really an impetuous person, would never act with great care and thinking, but nonetheless, fortune favored him. Fortune favored him in the sense that he had luck, right? So in politics, a lot depends on luck. Nonetheless, he says, returning to the passage we read, leaving the other half or so to be controlled by ourselves. There's still 50% room for maneuvering, for humans to actually have an impact. It's interesting to note the two metaphors that he uses to describe fortune, right? So immediately after that passage I just read, he says, fortune is like this river, violent river that can change course, that can become destructive suddenly. If it floods too much, if it rains too much, it'll flood a whole region. So fortune is like a river. It is somehow unpredictable. It has its own course that it flows. Sometimes it deviates from its course. So it requires the human being to be prudent, to be able to predict how things might turn around. They have to have an eye open to the possible changes in the flow of the river in order to navigate the river properly, right? So fortune requires a certain kind of prudence. In order to navigate fortune, you have to have a certain kind of prudence. But the second metaphor, which is a really sexist metaphor, he says, fortune is also like a woman, towards the end of that passage. This was obviously in the 15th century. Unfortunately, these are very patriarchal formulations. Woman here, the female subject, is viewed as something to dominate, right? And he says, you have to be able to control and dominate fortune, right? So fortune is both something that can change its course. So you have to have a certain kind of prudence in order to be able to predict and navigate fortune and the hand that you're dealt. But you also must have the courage and the impetuosity to actually do something bold and risky in order to dominate and control fortune, right? So the goal of the prince is domination of reality, right? To be able to look and grasp what the conditions are, that the hand that the prince has been dealt, but also, despite the hand that they've been dealt, the prince must be able to navigate and maneuver and then establish their own reality and truth. That is, to display a certain kind of political virtue. So this brings us to the third important concept, which is virtù, or virtue. But he doesn't mean virtue in some abstract, comprehensive sense. He's talking about political virtue. So it's not moral or ethical values or virtues. It is the set of qualities which enable you to deal with misfortunes, to ally with good fortune, and to rise to glory while you maintain your state. So that's what political virtue really is. It is about the art of doing politics. It's about mastering the art of doing politics in order to maintain your state and achieve glory. So what are these qualities? This is a complicated answer. Machiavelli gives you a very complicated answer because he simply cannot give you a code of conduct. He cannot tell you these are the qualities you need. That would be religion or moral philosophy. It's not meant for politics. Let's read a very important passage from chapter 15, page 50 of the Penguin edition, where he says why he cannot give you a list of virtues, right? He says, I hope it will not be thought presumptuous for me to do so, as especially in discussing the subject, I draw upon an original set of rules. Original set of rules. This has not been done before. He's the first one to endeavor to talk about political virtue in a completely new way. But since my intention is to say something that will prove of practical use to the inquirer, I have thought it proper to represent things as they are in real truth, rather than they are imagined. In real truth, that is, the notion that he uses is effectual truth. What matters when you're thinking about political virtues is not whether they are universally true or morally true. What matters is the effect they have. His concern with political virtue has to be with the results it produces, not by some kind of intrinsic value or worth of it. So in the domain of politics, you judge action, you assess virtue with respect to results. So he continues, many have dreamt up republics and principalities which have never in truth been known to exist. So this is Plato and Aristotle, classical thinkers who talk about what an ideal regime is, but these ideal regimes don't actually exist on the ground. The gulf between how one should live and how one does live is so wide that the man who neglects what is actually done for what should have been done moves towards self-destruction rather than self-preservation. Look at the formulation. He says, who neglects what is actually done for what should have been done. So if you are following a code of conduct that you derive from some kind of moral philosophy or religion, then you are bound to move towards self-destruction than self-preservation in the domain of politics. In the domain of politics, you have to learn to look at what things actually are like. You cannot derive a set of principles or code of conduct to follow and abide by. He says the fact is that a man who wants to act virtuously in every way necessarily comes to grief among so many who are not virtuous. This is the key point. In politics, you cannot act virtuously in every way. You cannot be morally and ethically virtuous. Therefore, if a prince wants to maintain his rule, he must be prepared not to be virtuous and to make use of this or not according to need. So what Machiavelli does is he's able to pluralize in the domain of politics, pluralize the sources of virtue. And it all depends on how one uses these qualities. But more importantly, a prince, if he really wants to be politically virtuous, must be willing to sacrifice virtuous behavior in other domains, let's say in ethics or morality. This is a period in which the Roman Catholic Church has become dominant, and it has a certain kind of conception of what moral life is like. For example, religion might prescribe that you always must be sincere and honest. But for Machiavelli, this is a moot question. For if you want to be in politics, you have to learn when to be sincere and when to be able to deceive something. Because what matters is how well it helps you maintain your state, how it helps you maintain your power. So a prince is somebody who has to be willing to risk salvation, that is, to be condemned by God. Because if he wants to play the game of politics, he cannot live according to moral precepts and moral rules. So you cannot moralize politics. It is unintelligible to ask a question, for example, of Lorenzo de' Medici, if he did something, whether or not that is morally right or morally wrong. The question in politics doesn't make sense. The question that does make sense is, well, what is the effect of those actions he took? And if the results of those actions are that he's able to maintain his power, eliminate threats that he sees, or better concretize and consolidate his power, then those are good politically virtuous acts. If, however, let's say Lorenzo de' Medici is extremely generous, he does something good for some people in his kingdom, but those actions end up disempowering him, that is, those people that he is generous towards conspire to kill him, then his actions were not politically virtuous. This is the key point. We'll look at some illustrations of this more concretely. But for example, so the prince has to be willing to not act virtuously, not act morally in all domains. So to be politically virtuous precisely means that you're operating between moral fields. You're maneuvering and manipulating the circumstances you have and doing things that are politically effective. So again, the emphasis is always on effectual truth. In page 56, this is chapter 18, he says that a prince is forced to know how to act like a beast. Again, this is in the context of the dominance of the church. And part of what it means to be human is precisely to not act like animals, to not act like a beast. So he must learn from the fox and the lion. The lion is somebody who represents force, violence, being able to dominate and conquer. If you're a human, in that context, what it means to be human is to live according to rules, not basically not live like a beast, not live like a lion. At the same time, the prince must also learn from the fox. That is, the fox is somebody who's conniving. The fox is somebody who's able to maneuver again and deceive, and can recognize difficulties. So he says, because a lion is defenseless against traps and the fox is defenseless against wolves. Therefore, one must be a fox in order to recognize traps and a lion in order to frighten off wolves. So in the domain of politics, you have to be able to, in some sense, even sacrifice your human qualities and to act like a beast. So it makes no sense, again, from Machiavelli's point of view, to moralize politics, to be concerned about what is good, what is ethically just, and what is moral. So there are lots of questions that come up that he discusses in this text. For example, one of the issues he discusses is whether a prince should be cruel or compassionate. Again, his answer is it depends. It depends on the effective results. Sometimes, for example, he discusses the Roman general, Scipio, who was extremely compassionate to his soldiers. This is in chapter 17. And Scipio, his soldiers tried to revolt against him, but he nonetheless forgave them for insubordination. And Machiavelli's point is that this is incorrect. Politically, it is incorrect. You can say that Scipio is an outstanding moral character, but politically, what he does is counterproductive, because ultimately it emboldens the insubordinate soldiers who are going to again revolt and rebel against him. So to be effective politically, to be effective, you have to also learn to be cruel if there is the necessity for that. So another kind of example is this question about whether or not you want to be feared or you want to be loved. And he says, from this is also chapter 17, from this arises the following question: whether it is better to be loved than feared, or reverse. The answer is that one would like to be both, the one and the other. But because it is difficult to combine them, it is far better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. One can make this generalization about men. They are ungrateful, fickle liars and deceivers. They shun danger and are greedy for profit. While you treat them well, they are yours. They would shed their blood for you and risk their property, their lives, their sons, so long as I have said above, as danger is remote. But when you are in danger, they run away. This is a dark passage because it reveals something about how he thinks about individual humans. Individual humans are fickle, liars, deceivers, and they're greedy for profit. So if you're a prince, you want to rule over a city-state with your subjects, you have to be able to inspire fear in your subjects, because that would prevent them from acting against you, conspiring against you. Even if you're unable to generate love. If you're able to generate love, that is, the subjects really love you, then of course they will always be obedient. But that is a difficult thing to do. So since that is difficult, it is more prudent to be able to inspire fear, because that will dissuade your subjects from conspiring and rebelling against you. That will make it more effective and easy for you to rule over your state. Another question that I've already mentioned in passing is about this issue of sincerity. There is a question about whether or not one of the chapters deals with the question, chapter 18, should the prince honor their word? Right? So should they be sincere and honest? Should they deliver on their promises? Again, the question is, well, it depends. You must, as a prince, if you want to be politically virtuous, you must be willing to sometimes not follow through on your word. That is, to deceive. Why? Because sincerity is simply a religious virtue. It is not a political virtue. Politics requires, again, for you to understand the circumstance, to recognize the threats you face, and maneuver accordingly. And if deception is the way to do it, then that is what matters. This brings us to another important insight about politics that Machiavelli comes up with, and it is the issue of appearance and staging. So politics, he understands, involves a certain kind of performative aspect. Again, from chapter 18, he says, everyone realizes how praiseworthy it is for a prince to honor his word and to be straightforward rather than crafty in his dealings. So everyone realizes. He's already saying that politics requires somebody out there to be able to see and perceive what this prince is doing. So when you are a politician, when you're especially a prince, you are on a stage, you are seen by everyone, and they can see what is going on. You are on display. And you cannot hide, you cannot always hide. So to be a politician, to become a prince, means that you're committed to a certain kind of public life and public scrutiny. You're always in front of an audience. So you need to be able to respond and understand to how the audience wants you to act. So in chapter 18, he says, a prince, therefore, need not necessarily have all good qualities I have mentioned above, but he should certainly appear to have them. So politics is also about a performative aspect. You have to be able to perform and convince the audience that you have certain kinds of qualities. For example, you could perform generosity. You can stage a situation where you give clemency to a set of prisoners who you've realized are not really serious threats, right? So that everybody sees that and they think of, oh, wow, look at this prince. He's so generous and kind, right? Sometimes you might want to actually show that you are much more destructive and fear-inducing than you actually are. Again, it's all about performance. It's all about knowing the emotions and the aspirations and the expectations of the audience, of your subjects, and also performing and maneuvering according to those expectations. So a prince has to know how to operate within complex configurations of power. You are part of a political community. So the people that you rule over are not some kind of romanticized entity. But you nonetheless have to understand them. You have to understand what they expect. And you have to perform the role and satisfy their expectations in some way. So you have to be able to have a sensitivity towards the morality, the ethics, and the emotional state of the political community you govern. And that doesn't mean that you aspire to demonstrate all the qualities that your subjects expect from you, but you must always certainly appear to have them, right? So a prince is somebody, to be a politically virtuous prince means that you're able to master the statecraft of politics. You're able to act according to necessity, act according to the hand that you're dealt, and dominate the fortune that you inherit. You have to learn how to sometimes act immorally, sometimes deceive if necessity requires it, sometimes honor the word, sometimes be more just, sometimes be more unjust, and again, shift back and forth between different moral fields, always with a sensitivity to what your subjects want, always with an awareness of what the audience is like and what they expect from you, and performing that role. That doesn't mean that you're trying to be sincere and be honest in public. It simply means that you're aware that the public requires a certain kind of image and you're performing that role adequately, right? So again, we can work towards a conclusion. What Machiavelli image of politics is that politics, the profound truth of politics is that it is about maintaining power. Maintaining power by any kind of means that are necessary, but always with a sensitivity and awareness of your surroundings, and awareness of those who are looking at you, and to those who are your audience. So what makes a prince virtuous is their ability to maneuver and manipulate necessary conditions into virtue. So it involves having many capacities. You have to be courageous, you have to be prudent, you have to be willing to violate rules and moral commands, and you have to always have a certain kind of sensitivity towards the sentiments and passions and interests of the people you rule over, or even your enemies, people who you're scared of as potential threats. So you have to adopt a certain kind of instrumental rationality to judge consequences of your actions and then act in politics. So in the field of politics, you're always judged according to the effectual truth, the effectual results of your actions. So Machiavelli's vision of politics might be very dark, but it is something that has shaped and influenced our contemporary understandings of politics. I will now just make one comment towards the end, which is that although Machiavelli in this book is trying to give advice to the new prince, Lorenzo de' Medici, part of the attempt is also to demonstrate to the prince that his way of looking at politics is new and that he has really some really good advice for him. But in reality, Machiavelli, as we have seen, we will see tomorrow with the discourses, is more sympathetic to the Republican form of government. So he's trying to think about in what way he can move this new kingdom towards a certain kind of long-term vision of a Republican form of government. So he's trying to acquire influence with the prince in order to be able to do that. Of course, that doesn't happen because he dies and the Medicis continue their rule. But when we will start to read the discourses, you will realize that actually his vision of politics has a deeper commitment to not principalities, not to a political form that is animated by the pursuit of glory. He actually is more sympathetic to the Republican form of government. And again, we'll discuss what that means. But he still realizes that the fortune, the context that and the circumstance that he is in, he's in exile, he's in retirement, and the current ruler of Florence is a monarch, the new prince. So again, he's responding to that circumstance. He's trying to adopt his own view of politics that he has elaborated in this text, and then trying to become a part of that ruling power structure in order to then make long-term changes that might move towards a Republican form of government. We'll see what it means for him to be a republic and why he prefers the Republican form of government over a principality. But hopefully this lecture helped you understand the text better. I will look forward to your responses.